kind of drawback to not having people that look, sound, and act different, right? And how do you weigh that, right? And then we got this book. I don't even know if I can grab it past the microphone. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Right, this one. Okay, I have read this book. I like this book. It was actually sent to me. I didn't buy it, which is actually very interesting because here's this whole indoctrination, that idea of like, oh, you know, like LGBT, we're going to come for the kids and we're going to make them gay. I never bought this. A company, which I can't say which company, saw my TikToks and are like, we love what you're doing. We want to send you some books that your students would love. And they sent me this one. And I read this. My students, most of them cannot read this yet. They cannot. Absolutely not. I think the book is great. I think it's absolutely spectacular that we get a queer perspective that we usually don't get, especially in kind of the mandated sex education, what do we call it, life skills now. But there is some graphic content in here that I could not, as a teacher, give to a student.
How old are your students?
Real talk, actually, my students go from kindergarten all the way to 12th because I have my master's in education, special education focus, so I can actually teach kind of anywhere on that spectrum. Most of them kind of fall into late middle school or middle school. And I can't give this. I'm not, and side note, I'm not saying not any middle schooler could ever see this, but I'm saying it would be out of the scope of my educational job to hand this to a student without consulting parents and kind of taking into consideration individuality and where the student is. Now, do I think that a police officer needs to be called? Is the teacher committing malpractice? Not for me to decide. I'm not the judicial branch of government, right? I'm saying I wouldn't partake in it, but I would love to hear your thoughts and how maybe one of your students may never actually run into a book like this ever, and if you're okay with that.
I would say, so just background, 2015 is when the California Healthy Youth Act was proposed in California. That was to, basically bring in comprehensive sexuality education to the state. Would be required once in middle school, once in high school, with each district being able to add on grades K through 12 to their decision. And so for me, I started learning about this actually December 2018. This had already been implemented.
Books like this, or?
Well, comprehensive sexuality education itself has a framework to this, but then in addition to that, there's supplemental curricula that they were using first to abide by in 2018, the California Healthy Youth Act law, which it became law in 2016. And the content does, in a way, relate to the literature just because of the fact that it brought in an update to the health framework in California. And so through the health framework, there was a variety of books being introduced to align with CSE. And some of those books are what I started looking into. And I'm going through, and parents are sharing things on social media. And I had never seen some of these books. So looking through them, then I had to go for myself to the library to see these books for myself, read through the health framework. But one of the most, I would say, explicit books that I saw was called SEX, The All You Need to Know Guide to Get You Through Your Teens and 20s by Heather Carina. And so I remember a parent posting about this and thinking, this can't be real, because it was recommended originally in the health framework draft as a school-wide read for grades 9 through 12. Now, the health framework, it's important, that is not required, but teachers can, use that material to their discretion, usually with accordance to their curriculum director at school. So at any rate, that book started discussing topics like blood play or fisting or deeper manual sex and these various topics. And then it said, what is it? And then how do I do it? And there was a long description. Sometimes it referenced the slang terms of the sex act. And then at the very bottom, there was this small section that said the risks, but it was so small. And
this is in grade school?
This was originally recommended as a school-wide read for grades 9 through 12.
So high school.
And they did take it out of the health framework. And as I was learning, I initially thought, okay, this is not going to be allowed in schools because they took it out of the health framework, but it has been used in some schools. And the thing for me was that book, I mean, there was stuff in there I hadn't heard of. And I'm not kidding.
Valid.
And I just feel like there's such a window of time of childhood where, I mean, I just didn't, some of these books and the graphic visuals, I just
Well,
personally don't think it's
My view on all this, I pulled it up, SEX, Second Education. It says on Amazon, reading age 12 years and up, grade level 7 and up. And the first component to this is whether or not parents have the right to decide what their children are being exposed to and when. And there's been an interesting amount of pushback from traditional liberals and more left ideological individuals saying, no, they're our children and we're the experts, so we decide. And one of the principal components of the Parental Rights and Education Bill in Florida was specifically that parents must be informed about what's going on with their kid, what their children are learning. And then the political debate turned into "don't say gay," despite the fact the bill bars people from talking about straight and heterosexual couples
Which is
as well.
Fascinating. So sorry to interrupt, by the way, but it's fascinating though. So let's we might as well really dive into it though. Then why is LGBTQIA simply the target of the accusations of indoctrination? That's what I want to know, right? Because real talk, if you're an OG queer, right? No one we're not trying to make kids gay. We don't need more kids to be trans. One thing that I always try to do is I try to reframe, right? Reframe means that idea of looking at somebody else's perspective, right? So I look at the other side's perspective. Parent, worried, explicit sexual content. You may be wanting to alter my child's sexuality. You may be trying to make them kind of go through, kind of hormone replacement therapy that may not be safe or not entirely proven. I'm worried about it, therefore I'm going to pull my kid. I see that perspective. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I see it. I want to know what the opposing perspective is. What would LGBTQIA, the trans community, gay individuals, what do we get out of getting kids to be gay or this material?
Yeah.
I don't know. I get the accusation. I get LGBTQIA. We're indoctrinating. Desmond, you wear makeup in front of kids, and you're gonna try to make them all wear makeup. Why? Why would that benefit me in any way, shape, or form? That's why I don't understand that accusation. So I would love to hear your perspective and your perspective on what. I get it. I don't. Again, not saying it's a bad book, right? But I'm just as protective. That was an overreach. I am extremely protective of kids almost as much as the parents, right?
Well, and I think to that, for my part, it never was about LGBTQ.
Okay.
It was just about the explicit content because, and I actually think that a lot of people, whatever their belief is,
right.
I think they do agree that there's pornographic content. Kids shouldn't be exposed to
Shouldn't
that.
be exposed. Well,
But why is it? So for me, not about LGBT at all.
Right.
However, it's these books typically that are wading into overt graphic content.
Right.
They're being given to grade schoolers.
Right.
And these teachers are saying, don't tell the parents.
Right.
They're saying we should resist these bills that give parents access to knowledge about the curriculum.
Right.
And then when Ron DeSantis does a press conference where he shows sexually graphic content, they say he's banning books. That he's and then what they do is they put on these shows where they'll have Catcher in the Rye and act like that's what's being banned. And no, the issue I see with, for instance, this book is gay. That is not sex education. Genderqueer is not sex education. This is kink education. Children, I think it's fair to say to a parent, hey, your kids are entering this age, and we'd like to discuss the birds and the bees, general reproduction, and how this stuff happens. When I was in 5th grade at a Catholic school, they gave us permission forms. We went to our parents. Our parents said yes or no.
Right.
Some kids were pulled out. Most of us, there was male sex ed. Then the boys would go to the computer room. The girls would come in and do female sex ed. The funny thing with that was the boys got 2 hours of game time and the girls got 20 minutes.
Right.
But what we're seeing with these books is this book is gay describes scat.
Right.
It teaches how to use Grindr.
Right.
And this is being provided to middle schoolers.
Right.
And then what happens is when this teacher comes out and she gives it to her middle schoolers, the parents call the police.
Right.
Because you cannot, it's illegal
You
to
can't
give
distribute
children.
pornographic. Yeah, absolutely. That's not
Well,
protected under free speech. We have the Supreme Court case to
What happens then is NBC News shows a picture of her holding a different book, which is about more ideological issues, and then says that she was trying to support gay rights, when the reality was parents were concerned that she was teaching 10-year-olds how to use Grindr.
Right.
There's no reason for that.
But
Well, and